Hopefully we have a lot of UX nerds in the audience to join the three of us on stage. But why don't we start with some quick intros, and then we can jump into the topics of the day.
All right, hi everyone. I'm Austin, working in design on a super strong design team of 4 people at Dune, formerly known as Dune Analytics.
Nate Rodriguez. I'm the UX research lead at Phantom. So working on the design team there. Pretty powerful team, so happy to be here.
And I am Amar. I am one of the co-founders of Despark. We are basically the user testing of Web3. So we've got a panel of cross-section of Web3 users that get to do interviews and surveys for rewards. Cool. Okay. Well, guys, before we dive into more of the spicy questions, why don't we set a bit of a baseline and let's make sure we're all talking the same language by defining what user research is. And maybe the best way to do that is we can start by explaining how it's done in Web 2 and how it has been done in Web 3, at least so far.
Yeah, so, what UX research is really sort of, diving into what users are experiencing, what are their needs, what are their desires, and are we solving the problems that they want to be solved with our product? So what it entails is bringing users in Web 2, you're able to, you have a whole list of emails, you can get a whole bunch of people, you can talk to them, you can put prototypes in front of them, get feedback in that way. So it's a really good way to pass insights on to the design team, to the product team, to make changes that users are actually going to find valuable and useful. So that's how it's done in Web 2. It's a little bit different in Web 3. I don't know if you want to speak to that, Austin, at all, or Web 2 at all.
I mean, to be honest, a lot of the fundamentals are the same. You have, attitudinal research where you understand what people are thinking and feeling. Behavioral, where you kind of track what people are actually doing. Behavioral usually tells you like what's happening. So if you're checking like your amplitude dashboard, and then attitudinal, so getting feedback on Telegram or formal interviews. That's more like why people are doing what they're doing. I don't think there's a massive distinction between Web 2 and Web 3 in that sense. I think the main difference is that users in Web 3 are kind of accustomed to building with you. They've really been along for the journey. So we have like a super engaged group of power users at Dune who are not shy to give us like immediate feedback whenever we ship anything or if we want to reach out. So just having that like shared builder mentality, I think is honestly the main difference. But a lot of fundamentals I think are the same. So.
Yeah, and I'll just say one other challenge with Web 3 is finding the users. So in Web 2, there's so many, you get your emails, you get, so much information about people when they sign up for your product. It's a little bit different with Web 3. I know Despark is a product that helps with that, but yeah, it's that's one of the bigger challenges, is getting the right people into these studies and getting the best insights from those people. So that's my biggest challenge at Web 3.
And I'll say there's a bit of a double-edged sword I find in Web 3, which is that the benefit is, you have objective truth. So when you find the right users, you're not just getting them to sort of self-identify their demographics and their history online. You have their on-chain record, which they can provide via wallets, obviously, and that allows you to validate that the person is exactly in the audience group that you are trying to test for and speak to. But to the point that both the guys made, there's just a different mentality of privacy, and it's a little bit harder to find those people. But when you do, and hopefully we can create like a culture of more and more feedback, to Austin's point, and be able to bridge those two things. Sweet. Okay, so I think everyone's on the same page about what user research is. Let's talk about where things kind of go from here. So Web 3 is notoriously daunting for normies to access. Do we think this is a feature or a bug?
I would say it's a feature. I think, to some degree, the complexity is part of the inefficiencies where people are making money. And so I think to some degree it is a bit of a feature. And I think if we really want to move, beyond where we are right now and get really big mass adoption, I think that's something that we need to reconsider. Is that feature worth it? Is the value worth it? Or is it, the growth? So that's my thought.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think there's analogies for what we're doing in the Web 2 world. a lot, and we don't really acknowledge it. We create like parallel, even language that we use to describe things, and I think it is currently a feature in that people want this information delta so they can arbitrage it. But if we want the industry to actually grow and to deliver on its promise, rising tide lifts all boats, I think we'd benefit from speaking the same language as people who are like not in our industry. So yeah, that's this. Don't get me started actually on this. Anyways.
I think we should double click a little bit more. Yeah, so I guess you bring up a good point, right? Is it sort of the the vernacular? Is it a marketing thing that we're just obfuscating the relatively straightforward transactions with a lot of fancy words and phrases, or is it the technical side? Like it actually is pretty clunky to do most things. The UX is not as seamless as Web2. So is it a dual problem? Is it one of the two kind of outweighs the other? Yeah.
I mean, it's definitely both. Like we're all in crypto, right? We have a language that we speak. There's a certain culture that exists within crypto. So that's one layer of things. And then there's if a lot of us have been in crypto for a long time, and we do things it's not the best UX, but we figured out our ways around it, and we're used to it by now. But when you put it in front of new users, I mean, a lot of people are really confused, and they're really, it's not accessible for a lot of people. And so, yeah, I think it's really important to look at both of these in both of these lenses and see, where are the ways that we can sort of bridge that gap and sort of bridge those users to Web3.
Yeah, I think any time you have a community that whether it's an organization, a nonprofit, a company, an industry, they're going to develop their own jargon, their own vernacular. So I don't think that's unique to us, but I just think that because of the information arbitrage and maybe this desire to feel like we're in some super secret society that no one could possibly understand, it was a feature for a while because you needed people who we're kind of willing to get on the boat and cross the ocean and not know where we're going to end up. And you need to optimize for a certain type of personality. But I think at this point, the technology's there. And I think now we need to maybe, develop a more streamlined way of communicating to everyone outside our industry. So.
Yeah, what it reminds me of a little bit is the latest wave of onboarding came from basically people being told by their friends to buy a bunch of shitters and trade those, and that's the lowest friction onboarding process of this cycle, and so maybe that's not a bad thing. That's an easy kind of on ramp, and then we can work on getting folks to experiment with many other use cases. Yeah, cool. So, okay, so maybe jumping a little bit into the user experience a little bit more. How do you guys think about balancing the level of composability to appeal to both Web3 natives without being too daunting and intimidating for newbies?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's our biggest challenge at Phantom right now is we are a pretty, consumer facing, we're for everyone, right? But we also want to, still support the degens and the people that are really, transacting on chain and that are really using various parts of Web3 and are really engaging with that. So we don't want to limit their ability, but we also don't want to expose new users to so much complexity where they're not going to continue, they're not going to make a first transaction, they're going to get really confused. And I've done a lot of research where, I'll put the use case is that people want to buy a token, and just to get that token, you have to understand that you need Solana or Ethereum and you need gas, and it's not super clear for people. And I think that can be a daunting experience, but you also want to give the ability for people that are well versed in Web3 to manipulate the different transactions and do things that they want to do on chain. So yeah, it's really about progressive disclosure to newer users, and as they get more comfortable with it, we can start exposing them to different parts of Web3, and they can sort of feel comfortable with that. But yeah, it's a big challenge.
Yeah, I think it depends on the product, but I'm full on at Dune at the moment, thinking about solving problems for our data analysts, who we call wizards. And I think a strategy that could work is like a barbell strategy, where you have a super accessible side of the product where people can get started, but then you have the other side, which caters to your power users, where they can really dig into the underlying SQL. They don't want to have some abstraction layer, some GUI, some graphical user interface between them and the code. They just want to see exactly what's there, have full transparency. But I think the worst case scenario is when you get stuck in the middle, if the kind of midwit situation where you are not catering to a new crowd and making it super accessible for, in Dune's case, to write queries, create charts and dashboards and share insights. But you're also not exposing the complexity and giving the power users that transparency that we actually can give them with on-chain data. So I like to think of it as like a barbell strategy and resist the urge to get stuck in the middle and build discrete paths for each type of user. And historically, we've been better at catering to our power users. So this is something I'm thinking about, like how do we build a more accessible experience for new people?
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think traditionally a lot of, I love the barbell analogy. I feel like that journey though can be often a lonely one. Like people are generally trying to navigate it by themselves. So, platforms like Dune, that's pretty cool because you've got your wizards to sort of, create a bit of a path forward. I don't know, Nate, if you have any thoughts of from your experience talking to users, how do folks go through that journey, that funnel from newbie to degen?
Right. Yeah. It's like a really common story. I'm sure a lot of us relate to this, where you'll have someone who is really knowledgeable in crypto that sort of brings you in. We found a lot of users are brought in through a friend or someone more experienced, and it's sort of like a slow drip. So you start, you get exposed to a major coin, and then you start getting into the meme coin. So it is like an evolution of, once you start understanding things and you're able to understand hey, what's the underlying technology with this? What's exciting about it? And you start realizing that there's a lot more to do on Web3 than what you're initially exposed to. And I think it's important to expose these things slowly, because I think it can be very overwhelming, and like you said, it can be lonely because you're sort of trading by yourself. And I think the value of crypto is it is a really social experience. And so if you are able to connect with people through Telegram and Discords and Twitter and all these different places, it can feel a lot more engaging and a lot less isolating. So
yeah, I would say from my experience, our platform helps connect various different companies to users to speak with, and I find something that you mentioned earlier is very true, where users in Web3 can be brought into the product development journey from a very early stage, because you can identify your would-be power users so early on. You can then get their advice and bring them along in all iterations, and that's a really powerful thing that I don't think is really possible without blockchain Rails. So yeah, maybe an ode to sort of bringing people through the barbell. What's the middle part? I don't know, the valley of death and the barbell curve. Sweet. Okay, so yes, here's a good one. Okay, so what are some of the assumptions about user behavior that you guys had to unlearn when moving from Web 2 to Web 3? What the new patterns that you've discovered? Do you think they're unique? Do you think they're sort of adaptations?
Yeah, I mean, I would say in the beginning, like I said in the beginning, there are so many broken things in the UX of crypto that people are finding workarounds, and it's just really interesting to watch them. And I'm like, hey, how did that feel? And they're like, oh, it's totally fine. But then when I observe them, I'm like, oh man, that took you did this crazy thing where you have to verify contract addresses and do all these things. That's not a good UX. That's not a good experience. So I've definitely seen that, because of the complexity of crypto and that it's not super hidden behind the way Web 2 is, where it's behind a wall of code, and you can sort of access and look at what's happening in the background, that, it can be, it's just a lot different in how you use the product compared to Web 2, where Web 2 has very clear rails on what you're supposed to do, where Web 3 is kind of unlimited. You can do a lot of different things, and you can change a lot of things in crypto. Then you can't really do that in Web 2 as much. So I think that was a big big challenge to sort of like unlearn and then relearn with the crypto Web3 people.
Oh, does that mean do you do sort of like learning journeys for your users in a different way now? Is that kind of part of the?
Yeah, I mean, it's so different because in Web2, you know, you use the UX to sort of guide people through, and you use marketing, all these different things where, you know, something like Phantom, we're not in charge of the chains that people are accessing or the meme coins that they're getting involved in. And so we don't really have a lot of control over those parts of it. And so it's a little bit more wild, and it's a little bit, and so we have to think about different user journeys and how people are getting to our product and what their goals are. I would say one, you know, really valuable framework is, you know, jobs to be done framework, where you're really sort of understanding what is the job that this customer is hiring your product to do. And if you focus really good on that, you're able to sort of understand them in a different way. But you have to really, you know, focus on what they're really trying to do. Because the product is so complex and kind of weird, it's not simple. And so, yeah, there's definitely all these different journeys that we have to be cognizant of.
Austin, any habits or behaviors that you had to unlearn, relearn, retrain yourself on as moving from Web 2 to Web 3?
Well, just in Web 2, there's so many established benchmarks for quality and experience. So even like my parents, when they encounter a poorly designed, you know, app or website, they have benchmarks for this, and they'll be like frustrated, and they're like, this is like, you know, this is terrible design. Like they, you know, they don't know anything about it, but they know what looks good. They couldn't tell you why, but they know what's good, they know what's bad, and they won't use stuff that's bad anymore. You know, maybe unlike even a decade ago, online people would kind of suffer through poorly designed, you know, web apps or apps. In crypto, you know, we have a lot of kind of built-in bad experience, even like gas and like, you know, the time it takes to transact, which we're improving slowly. But I think that up until now, you know, if you think about any ecosystem having, you know, explorers, achievers, social people, I think we've over-indexed, which is a good thing early on in an industry, to over-index on explorers, people that are willing to go along this journey with you, provide feedback. But I think we probably are at an inflection point where we need to be building like the other side of the barbell to make it more accessible for people. We need to start probably benchmarking the design and experience of our products to like Web 2 products. You know, I mean, it's cool to have a expressive loading animation, but ideally like things go through in a reasonable time frame, for example.
This is why I always love talking with Austin. He has like great frameworks for everything, the barbell, the explorers, and yeah, it's awesome. And yeah, that, you know, there's an interesting like discussion to be had around sort of intent-based design. Like that's like very easy, I would say, to sort of solve for in Web 2, where you ask, you know, the user like what are they trying to accomplish. But in Web 3, the same, you know, single transaction could be yielding many different types of outcomes for different types of users. So yeah, does intent-based design, intent-based sort of research, like is that what you guys use day to day? Like how do you drill into what someone is trying to get out of whatever they're doing?
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of talking to users, you know, understanding. Like I said, you know, applying frameworks like jobs to be done, it really helps sort of center the conversation on an action and a, you know, the job that they're that they care most about. And I think that just really helps sort of like, you know, center how we are going to design the product and, you know, why, you know, we want to make sure we're doing something that is solving a problem. So, you know, we want to make sure that these things are expressly you know, fleshed out, and you know, I think having different frameworks can really put those in a good position and buy buy-in for the rest of your team and the rest of your company. Because I think it's also important that the company is bought in with like user empathy, so you're able to sort of let that, you know, permeate through the coders and the data people and design people, so they have an understanding of what they're working on, and that they're working towards something that is going to be valuable for the users.
We're pretty lucky at Dune. We have a lot of traffic. We also have like a really, I guess, dedicated group of, you know, wizards. And yeah, when we make stuff, they'll tell us what they think of it, which is great. And I think it's a good problem to have. But one of the challenges is like getting the signal from the noise. And I've been at Dune for about a year now, so I'm getting better and better at figuring out like where the signals come from, like how to categorize them, when to dig deeper, when to lean on my intuition. But at the end of the day, I think you can get lost in writing complicated features, specs, or using internal jargon. And usually, what people want to accomplish is pretty straightforward. With Dune, like what do they come here for? They want access to on-chain data so they can basically get insights. For like wallets, for example, people probably want to buy stuff and make money. I think sometimes we overcomplicate things, but yeah.
Yeah, and to the point about like looking through the noise, I think with user research, a lot of people think it's about asking the user what they want and then just like hearing what they want and then doing it. There's a lot more to that. It's about observing them. It's about really sort of digging deeper to what they said and beyond what they said and what they're doing, and then sort of matching those two together. So it's really important that you're observing as well as talking to them, because it's you're looking at two different things. People don't want to look dumb, especially if you're using something and you can't figure it out. So a lot of times people will say, hey, oh yeah, it was great, I figured it out. But when you observed what they were doing, it wasn't true. And it's really important to sort of look past that and to really sort of, to look past the noise and to really get that signal that you're looking for.
Yeah, that is an incredible point. Thank you, Nate. And I guess segueing from there, you guys have a ton of experience in separating signal from noise. I think there's a lot of builders out there who want to, be talking to users more, understanding users' needs more, designing and building for users more. But it's kind of hard to know how to get that started, get that practice started, what the important pieces are. What would your words of advice be to folks that want to start a practice or amplify it? What are the things to really focus on?
Yeah, I would say talk to your users as often as possible. And I always tell my designers as well that I work with, let's put designs in front of them as early as possible. If it's wireframes, if it's whatever, let's talk to them and let's get this feedback as early as possible. And I think another way to do that is just to be really engaged. So you want to you were talking about Telegram. That's a great resource for crypto and Discord channels. But then, I think there's value in doing a little bit more formal research. It doesn't have to be this big process, but really sort of, writing out a script with a few questions that you can ask the same questions to a handful of people. So you're, getting consistent feedback and you're putting out the right, getting consistent data back. And then also just making sure you're talking to the right people. So I think it's really important to look at your product, who is using your product. And you should talk to those people that fit into that use case. And then similarly, if you're going to go into a new, if you're trying to expand your product to new users, look for that user and talk to them and understand their problems. It's not super complicated, but I think it does take time and effort. So you got to do it. You got to just constantly be engaged with your users, and you'll learn a lot.
Yeah, I would say there's like a landscape of research methods, right? You have, qualitative, quantitative, attitudinal behavior. You can map it on a 2x2. And different research methods are going to fall into each of these quadrants. So, interviews, for example, are going to be attitudinal. If you run a usability test, that might be more behavioral. You're actually seeing what people are doing. And so I think the real art of, conducting research when it comes to design is understanding this landscape and being thoughtful and nuanced about when you decide to use each method. So for example, if you're just starting off a project or you're about to kick off a big feature, you might want to run some interviews and actually talk to people, do more generative research. But sometimes it's not worth the time. If you're just shipping a small feature, and it would take more time to go out there and set up this long study. If you have a strong intuition, just build it, ship it, and then see what people do with it. And then if it doesn't work, kill it. So I mean, when you're running, when you're in this game, I mean, time is money. So I think understanding the different methods, thinking strategically about like when to deploy them, and then meeting people where they are. So like in crypto is Telegram, right? So everyone's on Telegram, you talk to people. And then also have people at your company who are close to the users outside of the design team. We have some people who are like going back and forth with our customers and with our wizards and data analysts all day, and bringing them into that conversation when we're deciding what to build and how to build it.
Yeah, I love it. Only thing I would add is that I think a lot of people, everyone's super busy. It's hard to like allocate time to one thing versus another. And oftentimes talking to users, even though it's really important, everyone knows it's important, you kind of, falls down the priority ladder. I would urge everybody to reframe the way you think about it, because every hour you spend on talking to a user is probably 5 to 10 hours you could be saving on dev time, right? Because if you build something that people are not going to use or they're not able to use for whatever reason, then you've got to go all the way back and kind of start from scratch. So talking to users, most important thing, I think, is the message for this panel would sort of leave you with. I think we're like pretty much at time. I guess one last plug. The three of us want to create a user-centric design mafia for Web3. So if anyone's interested in putting our heads together and creating more of a playbook for this space, I think it would be really fun and everyone would benefit. But other than that, thank you to the awesome panelists. These guys are really, really the cream of the crop in Web3. So thanks for joining me, and see you guys next ETHDenver.
Awesome.